Welcome to Chapter 2. In this chapter, we will begin introducing you to nouns. Last week in Chapter 1, we looked at verbs, the action of the sentence. Now we're going to be looking at nouns, which actually help us to what the subject or the direct object is in relation to those verbs. Before we go too much further, I do want to emphasize to you that what I'm about to introduce to you, for the most part in this chapter, I'm going to be giving you is the groundwork for what you need to know for nouns. In order to fully appreciate and understand what it is I want to teach you in this course about nouns, at least this week, you're going to actually have to also get Chapter 3 involved. So I'm not going to be putting a lot of emphasis on memorizing everything that's in this chapter. I'm laying down the basic concepts, and when we do Chapter 3 as well, that'll help bring everything together. With that in mind, then, let's move into Chapter 2 and the nouns. This is the noun clown. You may recognize him from your textbook, and just as we have Vera Verb that helps us to learn about verbs, you're going to have the noun clown with us, who's going to lead us through as we begin to learn all about Greek nouns. Now, Greek nouns are a little bit different than English nouns in that there are actually three different classes of nouns. As you look there, we have a triangle-shaped boxing match, and we have in the far left-hand corner we have the two ladies there raising their fists up, and they're holding a banner that says first declension. And that's because in Greek some nouns are categorized as feminine, and these are nouns that end mostly in alpha or eta, and those are the first declension nouns. In the other corner to the far right, you see a gentleman there that looks a little bit like Mario from the Nintendo game, and you see a rather nondescript individual, looks more like Casper the Ghost. And these are second declension nouns, and these nouns are mostly masculine and or neuter. And finally, in the third corner, with their back to us for the most part, you'll see that we have both looks like a masculine figure with his back to us, a young lady, and another neuter character. That's because the third declension is a grouping of nouns that contains a mixture of all masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns. Now, in the next few weeks over the course of the first term, you're going to be dealing primarily with first and second nouns. And we call them declensions because they are groups of nouns, okay? And you'll notice that they're all holding up their hands in a clenched fist, and that is to help you remember that we are talking about declensions. And in this particular lesson today, you're going to be dealing with second declension nouns, those that are masculine and neuter. Now, when we looked at Vera Verb, I introduced to you the fact that she had 5 different aspects to her that helps you remember the 5 different parts of the verbs. Do you remember them? All right. There was her tense, there was her voice, there was her mood, and then there was the person and the number. And that's how we would parse verbs using Vera's memory device there. When we look at the noun clown here, okay, we want to also identify the parts of a noun, and that's called declining a noun. Although for ease of communication, we'll often refer to it as parsing, just like we do with verbs, even though technically one parses nouns. Parses verbs and decline nouns. But when you are declining, or rather parsing a Greek noun, you're going to look for 3 things. What is the verb's gender? Okay, the noun's gender. As you're going to discover in just a few moments, all Greek nouns have a gender, whether they're masculine, feminine, or neuter. And you can see that our noun clown there has some rather large grinder teeth, and grinder and gender sound alike, so that's why we have that. On his chest, on his shirt there, you see he has a rather large number on his shirt, and that's to help remind you that in addition to determining what is the gender of the noun, you also need to know the number. Is it singular or is it plural? Finally, case. And the case is a word that you're going to be introduced to in just a few moments. The case tells us how exactly that noun functions within the sentence. And so we're going to take a look at all these here as we move throughout. So let's start off first of all with gender. In Greek, Gender is applied to every noun. A noun is classified as either being feminine, masculine, or neuter. Okay? Now, I do want to stop at the moment and just let you know that this does not have anything to do with anything being particular female, masculine, or neuter. It's just the way they're classified. Let me show you what I mean. For instance, in Greek, a door, thura, is classified as feminine, although there's nothing particularly feminine about the door, and nor did Greeks think of the door as a female. Or, for instance, a house, oikos, is known as being masculine. Okay, again, this is a way that Greeks categorize their nouns. It doesn't necessarily connect it with a actual gender in the way we think of human beings. And then lastly, biblion is neuter, biblion for a book. Okay, and so we could go through, and you will notice as we go through the course and as you go through your vocabulary, every noun is going to have its own gender, and it will always keep that gender. How do you know the gender? You're going to be learning them as we go through the vocabulary list. And when we get into chapter 3, I'm going to give you a nice little trick in order to help you learn the noun's gender along with when you're learning the noun. I will tell you right now that that little trick involves learning the definite article. Every Greek noun that you have learned so far comes with its own definite article, whether it is ha, or whether it is he, or whether it is ta, and we'll be covering those in chapter 3. But again, we'll come back to this. That's how you know what gender the noun is, and it will always have that gender. But at this point, what's important for you to remember is that there are 3 genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter, and that every noun has to have a gender when you're identifying it. The second thing is number. When we look at a Greek noun and we read it, we can find out if there is one clown, okay? Or sometimes a noun, we'll know that there are 2 clowns, or there can be many clowns. So when we look at a noun, we're going to want to identify what its gender is, and then how many of them are. If we're talking about men, is it 1 man, 2 men, many men, women, 1 woman, 2 women, many women? The noun and the way that it is actually constructed will tell us not only the gender, but more specifically how many. And that leads then to the third thing that we want to be on the lookout for when we're looking at, and that is going to be case. Let me just point out to you at the bottom, for instance, you can see there we have the singular logos, okay, or we can say logoi, words. And as you can note there at the bottom there, there's just a simple change in the ending, just like you saw with the verbs. So that's a clue to you what you can expect as we go through this lesson and the next, that Greek nouns, just like Greek verbs, can change their number and, as you're going to see, their case simply by changing out their ending. Now, speaking of case, we started that. Let's continue on with that. The case. We need 2 things to make a sentence. We need a noun and we need a verb. And for instance, in this little sentence that we have up there, we see Jerry runs. In Greek, the word case refers to how the noun actually functions in the sentence. In the sentence that you have on the screen there, Jerry, that noun there, is actually the subject. And in Greek, we would refer to that as the nominative case. Let me give you some examples here from English at how this works. In English, the case of a noun is not actually determined by its ending, but it's actually determined by word order. In English, for the most part, we stick the subject at the beginning of a sentence or a phrase or clause so that we know what's actually going on or who the sentence is talking about, and then we use prepositions and other parts of speech to help us figure out what it is that we're trying to say. Take a look at what we have here on the screen. If we don't put English words in the order in which they need to appear, then we have this one gentleman on the left, Joey, ball to Alfred, hit John, and over there he's got Alfred, John, Joey, ball to hit. All of this looks an awful lot like a secret code that you'd expect on the back of a cereal box. Questions that we don't really understand by simply looking at this code are things like what or whom was hit? who did the act of the hitting. In other words, who's the subject of this sentence, and to whom was it hit? Who is the indirect object? And then we could even ask the question of possessiveness. Whose object or what person was hit. So these are all things that if we don't put if we don't put words in the right order in English sentence, things don't make sense to us. But in English, of course, when we put it all together, then what we discover is Alfred hit John's ball to Joey. Once we understand the code, we're able to move along through the sentence. In Greek, we don't actually have to worry about word order. That should hopefully come as good news to you. If you're worried already as you're looking over this lesson, trying to figure out how will I be able to identify what is the subject, the object, or the indirect object, the really wonderful thing about Greek is that it has specific endings and specific groupings according to cases that actually tell us what role it's playing. In Greek, we have 5 different cases, 4 of which you're going to work with most of the time. We have the nominative case, the genitive case, the dative, the accusative, and then the vocative. And the nouns that you're going to be working with in Greek can appear in any one of these 5 cases. All right, no matter whether it's first, second, or third declension noun, or whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter, plural, or singular. All of these cases work together with the nouns. The first case that you need to become familiar with in this class is the nominative case. The nominative case is also known as the naming case, but for your purposes, what's important for you to know is it's the subject. When a noun in a Greek sentence appears in the nominative case, that is your clue to know that that is the subject of the sentence. Here we have our little memory device here, and you can see we have Norbert and Norma nominative, this brother and sister team who are going to be with us throughout the course, reminding us about how nominative works. And you can see that they are in a subjet, which reminds you that the nominative case is the subject. Let me give you an example here. On the screen we have the Greek sentence, Lue anthropos. Now notice, lue, of course, is a verb and anthropos is a noun. But because in Greek sentences word order is not as important as it is in English, you don't have to actually have the noun come before the verb. The verb can actually precede the noun as it does in this sentence. But we don't say in this sentence, he looses a man, because I know that anthropos, that omicron sigma ending that ends anthropos, is my key to know that that is the nominative case, that is the subject. So even though the sentence is sort of mixed up as far as word order goes, I know that it actually reads, a man looses. So the nominative case is the subject of the sentence, and that is the one that you're always going to want to identify in the sentence so you know who or what is the subject of the verb in that sentence. Next is the genitive case. The genitive case is the case of possession definition of source. It tells us who or what it is becoming, the action is coming from, or the subject is coming from. And you can help think of it more often by the use of the word of before the noun. We have here Gerard and Geraldine genitive, all right? And the genitive case here is the case of. It helps us to remember, and they're in love, which helps us to remember the word of. So let me give you an example here from the Greek. We have here the Greek sentence, adelphos anthropou lue. Adelphos, I know, based on the omicron sigma ending of that word, there is the subject, adelphos. It's in the nominative case, so I know that it is a masculine singular nominative noun, and we'll talk about parsing again in a little while. So that's my subject. Anthropou, I know by the omicron upsilon ending that that is the genitive case. So I can say, for instance, a brother of a man. And then I've got my lue at the end, my verb, which is a present active indicative third person singular. And I know then that the translation is a brother of a man looses. Or if I would like to make it even sound more simpler than that and a little smoother, I could say simply, a man's brother looses. Now notice what I did not do here. I did not do a brother of a man he looses. Even though the verb here, as you were learning it last week, the lue is he looses, but when you bring that verb together with the noun as the subject, you don't need to have that redundancy of saying a brother of a man he looses. You can simply say a brother of a man looses, or a man's brother looses. The third case in Greek that you're going to become familiar with is the dative case, or we might think of this as our indirect object. The indirect object is the person or thing that is indirectly receiving the action of the verb. All right, and we're going to use words with this like in, with, by, for, and to, and you're going to need to add it to the sentence just like you have to add the word of with genitive. Don't worry, at this point I don't expect you to be an expert at this. I just expect you to get the basic ground rules for this, and of course we'll have lots of practice that we can work on both independently and together as we begin to understand this. But the genitive is going to help us to know the indirect object. So if I say I threw the ball, the question is to whom did I throw it? And the dative case would tell us that. Here's an example of a sentence. Adelphos graphae anthropo. A brother writes to a man. Again, adelphos, I know from that omicron sigma ending on the end of adelphos that that is a nominative ending, so I know that that's my subject. Unlike anthropo at the end, I happen to know that that omega with the iota subscript under it indicates to me that it is the dative ending. So I know that a brother is doing something to, with, by, or for a man. Remember, you want to add those words in for the dative. And then my verb in the middle is graphe, coming from grapho. And I would parse that present active indicative, again, third person singular. So it is a brother writes to a man. Our fourth case that we want to look at today is the accusative case, and this is the case of the direct object. This is the noun that receives the action. I throw the ball. What was thrown? The ball. The accusative case is the direct object. Here you are going to be meeting today Armitage and Amelia accusative, and they are going to be with us throughout the entire course, reminding us of how the accusative works. Like the nominative case, you do not add anything to this noun when you translate it. Unlike the genitive where you add of, and the dative when you might add to, with, by, or for, you simply just translate the noun as it would come across in its definition. So, for instance, adelphos lue anthropon. A brother looses a man. A brother looses a man. Adelphos, again, the omicron sigma tells me that this is a masculine singular nominative. Lue tells me that this is a present active indicative third person singular verb. So this is a brother looses. And then my noun, anthropon, masculine singular accusative. I know that that's my direct object. A brother looses a man. One more point before we go on to the last case. Do notice so far, ladies and gentlemen, that I have not said things like the brother or the man because you've not yet been introduced to the Greek definite article, or what we refer to in English as the word the. And at this point, you cannot say the word the. You can just simply say a brother or a man or a woman or a book because we have not yet learned the definite article. So just keep that in mind as you do your practicing. The fifth and final case is known as the vocative case, Victor and Victoria vocative, and this is the case of formal address. This is when somebody will simply say something like, "Oh man," or "Oh God," or "Oh Lord." Okay, and so you can see here that Victor is a rather conceited individual, and he likes to be referred to as Sir by Victoria. You're not going to see this case a whole lot, but you do need to be aware of it because I guarantee you it will show up every once in a while, not only in our Greek New Testaments, but in our practices. And when it shows up, I can promise you that you will have long forgotten about it, and then I will remind you of it when you stumble across it. But nonetheless, let's actually take a look at the sample sentence. Lues, anthropa. Notice here that it just simply ends with a epsilon at the end. You got lues. Lues is a present active indicative, second person singular, meaning you loose. But the anthropa, because it's the vocative, I know by that epsilon ending that it's the vocative, and so I would say, oh man, you are loosing. Again, you won't see the vocative near as much as you will the nominative, the genitive, the dative, and the accusative, but you do need to be familiar with it nonetheless. Okay, with that in mind, let's begin looking at just a few more things. You are dealing with the second declension here in Chapter 2. Second declension nouns, again, just as a reminder, are mostly masculine and neuter nouns, and you know that they're masculine or neuter by the way that they end. Again, I'm going to teach you the little trick that you're going to learn next chapter about the definite article, but you also should keep in mind that all the nouns that you learned that end in omicron or omicron sigma and omicron nu are either masculine or neuter. If it's omicron sigma, you know it's masculine and it will always be masculine. It never will change. If you learn it as omicron nu, you know that it's neuter and it will always be neuter. Now, with that in mind, let's begin to take a look at some of the paradigms that you're going to be learning. But again, keep in mind, I do not want you to memorize these yet. I want you just to look them over. You can become familiar with them. I want you to be familiar with the fact that omicron sigma means masculine and omicron nu means neuter. But I'll actually have you memorize them all together at once in an easy way once you actually learn the feminine nouns, which you'll be learning in the next chapter. With that in mind, let's take a look here. Look at the nominative, the genitive, the dative, the accusative, and the vocative. That's on the left-hand corner. Down the center, you can see the various ways, endings, that the various endings will change the noun. And then in the far right-hand corner, you can see the translation. So if I have the word anthropos, which is the way that you learned it in your vocabulary as a masculine noun, then just simply as it appears, anthropos, it's just simply man or a man. But if I put it as anthropou, if I take off that omicron sigma ending and I put on the omicron upsilon, which is part of the genitive ending that you'll be learning, then I know that automatically that is a genitive version of the noun, and it suddenly, in the translation, becomes of a man. Okay? And if it's in the dative, okay, then I know by that omega with the iota subscript on the end, it's dative, and it becomes to or for a man. And then the accusative, anthropon, okay? Now don't let that omicron nu at the end confuse you into thinking that suddenly this has become neuter. It doesn't change its gender. The gender is as you learned it. The omicron nu here is a different ending than the one that you learn with the neuter. So in this case, anthropon is just simply a man, and then the vocative, anthropa, is o man. If I was going to be parsing these, then because these are all singular, then I would be saying that it's masculine singular nominative, a man, or masculine singular genitive, of a man, masculine singular dative, to or for a man, or masculine singular accusative, a man, or masculine singular vocative, o man. And we'll have an opportunity here to look at how to parse these in just a few minutes. Here's the plural version. Anthropoi is men. Anthropon is the plural genitive of men. The plural dative, anthropois, to, for, in, or by men. Or just the simple accusative, anthropous, men. And then in the vocative, we have anthropoi, o men. Now, I want you to notice something very important here. The vocative and the nominative have the same exact ending. How will you know whether it is nominative or vocative? The good news is you'll have to just figure it out by context. We will not be able to tell until we get into more complicated Greek sentences. But again, just to help you with the parsing, I would start out as masculine plural nominative, masculine plural genitive, masculine plural dative, masculine plural accusative, and masculine plural vocative. Okay, let's move on now and let's take a look at some neuter nouns that do the same thing. You learned the Greek noun doron. Doron ends with an omicron nu, so the way you learn that in the vocabulary with the omicron nu ending is your clue right away that doron, the word gift, will always be a neuter noun. Again, we've already done this, so I'll just run through this really well. Doron, which means gift, is a masculine singular nominative. Doru, we put on that omicron upsilon ending, means of a gift. Dorao means to for a gift. Doron means a gift, and then doron, the vocative, is o gift. Okay, or in the plural, dora, masculine plural nominative gifts. Doron, masculine plural genitive of gifts. Dorois, masculine plural dative to, for, with gifts. Or the accusative, masculine plural accusative gifts. Or again, the vocative gifts. Okay, I think you get the sense of what we're doing. All that we have to do is know the gender of the noun, and we learn that when we learn it as a vocabulary word. And then as you're going to learn the endings, these endings are going to tell you not only what is the number, whether it is singular or plural, but it also tell you what case it is, that is, how it is functioning within a sentence. And we'll get to that and bring all this together when we get to Chapter 3. But in the meantime, let's do a few practices here with me. If you like, you could turn to page 23 in your book, and you'll notice that we have the two paradigms there, one for masculine and one for neuter. You can see in the top right-hand corner we have our little Mario guy there. And so anthropos. Anthropos is a word that means man. And when I look at the paradigm, I see omicron sigma. And because of that ending is on there, I know then that this is a masculine singular nominative, and it means a man. And you can see there on the screen that I've demonstrated to you how I want you to parse these nouns. Just simply an M, an S, and an N with some slashes between that, just to indicate to me that you know it's masculine, that it's singular, and that it's nominative. Just the same way we did when we were working on the verbs. Now let's take a look at anthropoi. Again, the same noun, but notice all we've done is we've removed the omicron sigma ending that was already on there, and now we've put on an omicron iota. Again, looking at our paradigm there, we look around and where do we find the O or the omicron iota ending or the oi ending, and we see that that is our masculine plural nominative ending. So we now know that this should be translated as men. Logon comes from the Greek word logos. The omicron sigma ending, as we learned in our vocabulary as logos, tells us that it is masculine. And the omicron nu ending, again, as we look at our chart, we know that it's masculine. So when we look at it and we see the omicron nu ending, we know therefore that it is a masculine singular accusative. It's playing the role of direct object, so it is simply a word. Namus comes from the Greek word namas. Once again, we have that omicron sigma ending, okay, in the vocabulary, so we know it's masculine. The us ending tells us, as we look at our chart, that it is a masculine plural accusative, so we're not talking about one law, we're talking about many, so it is laws. Hero, coming from the word heron. All right, we know from the vocabulary that heron has an omicron nu ending, which tells us that it is neuter. The omega ending with the iota subscript, as you'll be learning soon enough, will tell us that this is in the dative case. And so what we have here is a neuter singular dative. And so the way I would want to translate this, depending upon context, would be either to or in, by, or with a temple. So depending on context, I might want to say the man goes to the temple or the man went in a temple. Context will help us to know exactly which preposition to use, but you just need to keep in mind that with the dative, you want to add that to, in, by, or with, and sometimes even some other words that we will see as we move along. The last noun that we'll look at by itself, and then we'll take a look at how this all works together with both nouns and verb, is the word tekna. Now, you know that the word tekna, as you learned it, is neuter, and you know it because you learned it as teknon. But when I look at my neuter paradigm there on page 23, and I'm looking for that alpha ending, oh my, this is not good. I see an alpha ending in the plural nominative, I see it in the plural accusative, and I also see it in the plural vocative. And what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that tekna can be any one of these three. It could be either your nominative, it could be operating as your subject, it could be your accusative, not neuter plural accusative, so it could be acting as your direct object, or it could be in the vocative. You could be saying, "Oh, children." How will you know in cases like this whether or not it is the subject or the accusative, or, we're talking about the nominative or the accusative or the subject or the direct object? The context of the sentence is going to help you. With that in mind, let me do a few practice sentences with you before I release you from the lesson today. On the screen here, I have a Greek sentence for you. Adelphos gnoske teknon. And I've actually parsed out for you the nouns and the verb so that you can see how this works. And this is the way I want you to follow it when you do your assignments. I want you to parse above the Greek noun, and then below it, as you're going to see in a moment, I want you to write out your translation in a smooth English sentence. So, adelphos, I know from my learning the charts, learning the paradigms, that adelphos is a masculine singular nominative ending, that it has that ending. So I know that adelphos here is the subject of the sentence, and it is simply a brother. Gnoske is a present active indicative third person singular verb, so it is a brother he knows, or just simply a brother knows, because we don't need to have the redundancy of a brother he knows. And then lastly, teknon. Okay, as I look at this, I know that teknon in the singular can be either the nominative or it can be the accusative. All right, you can look at your chart there on page 23. Take a look at that. The nominative can be either teknon or the accusative can also be teknon. But because adelphos is already has the place of the nominative and it's clearly a nominative, then I'm able to figure out that teknon in this case is the accusative, that is therefore the direct object. And so in this case I would translate the sentence, a brother saw a child, and that is an incorrect translation. It actually should be a brother knows a child. And I could stop this video and correct that so you didn't know it, but I think you need to know that your professor also makes mistakes when he does Greek as well. And so I'm just going to admit it. That should actually read, a brother knows a child. Let's take a look at this other short sentence. Didaskalon gnosketa. Didaskalon is masculine singular accusative. I know that it's masculine because I learned it as didaskalos. When I look at my paradigm, I know that the omicron nu in the masculine nouns is my clue that it's the accusative, so I know it's the direct object. And then I have a verb here, okay, and it's a present active indicative second person plural. And that would be you know, all right, and the plural. But now, what I don't have in this very short sentence here is I do not have a nominative case. Do you notice that? There's nothing in here that says masculine singular nominative. In those cases when there is no nominative, but you do have an accusative or direct object and you have a verb, the subject of the verb is actually contained in the verb itself. So in this case, the subject of the sentence is the you in the verb, as in you know a teacher. Okay, you know a teacher. Let's take a look at a slightly more complicated sentence. Angeloi theou akousi naman. Angeloi, the omicron iota ending on the end of that, helps me know that we're looking at a nominative plural. I know it's masculine, so it's masculine plural nominative. Theou comes from theos. The omicron upsilon ending tells me it's genitive, masculine singular genitive. There's my verb from akouo, present active indicative, third person plural. So angels of God, because of my genitive, they hear. Okay, angels of God, they hear, or just simply angels of God hear. And what is it they hear? Well, at the end there I have naman, masculine, singular, accusative. Naman comes from, of course, namas, law. And so my translation here is angels of God hear a law. Or if I wanted to make it even smoother, I could simply say God's angels hear a law. Let's just look at two more and then I'll give you your assignment. Lege apostolos logon anthropo. If you want, maybe you want to just pause the video for a second and look at what I've written there for parsing, and then you can come back and see if you translated it correctly. So why don't you do that? Pause the video and attempt to translate this sentence, and then when you come back, we'll see if we have it correct. Okay. The sentence starts off with a verb, as you probably noticed. And of course, I've done all the parsing for you. The present active indicative third person singular from lego is lege. And our subject in this sentence is the masculine singular noun apostolos. So an apostle speaks. Well, what does he speak? Logon, masculine singular accusative. He is speaking a word. That's fine, but to whom is he speaking that word? Well, that is where our indirect object comes in at the end of the sentence, masculine singular dative, anthropo. And so my translation there is an apostle speaks a word to a man. How did you do? Were you able to figure it out? Keep in mind, it's going to take a little bit of practice and getting used to this, but I gave you this sentence on purpose because I want you to see that even though the word order of the sentence is somewhat mixed up, it's sort of like just decoding a coded serial on the back, a coded message on the back of a cereal box. As long as you know the parts of the sentence, you can make the sentence work for you. Here is our last sentence for this lesson for practice. Akousin anthropoi namus. Once again, why don't you pause the video for a second, come up with your own translation, and then see what it is that I actually give you and see if it matches up. Go ahead, I'll wait for you. Just pause the video. Okay, welcome back. Akousin anthropoi namus. Akousi, of course, comes from echo, our present active indicative third person singular verb. Anthropoi comes from anthropos. That oi tells us that it is the plural nominative. And namus, coming from namas, tells us that it is masculine. And the us tells it is plural accusative. And so, knowing that anthropoi is the subject, we have our verb and our accusative. It is men have laws. And that's what my translation is there. So, did you get that? If not, maybe you should pause and relook and see if you can figure out what you did wrong. Okay, again, I'm not expecting you to memorize any of these noun endings at this point. I just want you to become familiar with the way that the nouns change themselves out with their endings, just like the verbs did. With that in mind, here is your prep work for class, keeping in mind that you're also going to be doing Chapter 3 today, all right, but or at least this week. So what I want you to do is I'd like you to, first of all, review the present active indicative paradigm that you did for the verbs. That is, the things that you did for the verbs last week in Chapter 1, oese, amen, eta, usi. Make sure that you've got those down. Do your best to learn the vocabulary from this chapter, all right? And also give the chapter a good read over just to review what it is that I taught you here today. And then I would like you to attempt to complete at least 10 of the Chapter 2 practice sentences that are in the workbook. Again, let me emphasize, do not try and commit to memory these endings. It will be much easier for you to do that when we go over chapter 3 and you have all the pieces put together. Just use the paradigms that you have there on chapter 23 in your book and do the practice sentences. And then when you come to class on Wednesday and you've already gone over chapter 3 as well, we'll put this all together and it will make much more sense to you. All right, good luck as you do your practices, and I'll see you in lesson number 3.